Hello and welcome to the Small Pocket Podcast, the podcast for content creators and marketing teams who are interested in building a successful video strategy and using video to build relationships with your customers or audience. I'm your host, Will Corcoran. In this episode, I spoke to brand and video marketing strategist Phil Nottingham, formerly of Wistia, now running his own video strategy agency. Phil has worked on some amazing campaigns such as 1-10-100 and Brand Wagon, among many others, and is an expert in video production, video content strategy, and SEO. Phil can be found online delivering many amazing lectures and presentations about video strategy and advertising, and is one of the world's leading video strategists today. In this episode, we discuss B2B video marketing strategies, why going viral doesn't help your brand, and how to build a successful online video presence. So let's get into it. Phil, please welcome to the podcast. So could you just walk us through what a video strategist is and what your role is?
Yeah, sure. So I guess what I do is I help companies work out what to make, how to make it, how to distribute it, and how to measure it. So really that soup to nuts kind of beginning to end process from sort of creating a video and getting out in the world, all for sort of businesses, mostly B2B businesses, some media companies who are using video for marketing. So that's kind of what I do day to day. And I got into that. I was originally I was sort of doing a lot in film and theatre, and worked there for a number of years, and then ran out of money, and then got a job doing sort of some admin for a company that does technology behind Sky TV, satellite TV, what was called over the top video at the time. So that was basically video over IP. So I learned a lot about the sort of technical side of video delivery. And then I got a job in a marketing agency where I kind of learned SEO, marketing distribution, platform stuff. So all that kind of technical marketing stuff. And then I realized, well, I've got three skills here that not many people have all three of, which is technical video, creative video, and technical marketing. And I thought, well, I can combine the three together because I saw there was obviously a need for that in the market this is back in like 2010 with more and more companies kind of investing in video and doing more and YouTube coming to the fore and all that kind of thing. So yes, that's kind of how I got into it.
Can we go back to your theatre days? What were you doing? Were you an actor or?
No, I was working more like as a sort of producer. I actually did some stage combat choreography as well, and a lot of producing some technical side, so lighting, sound, that kind of thing. So adjacent to video, some video work. So basically whatever I could do, but not acting so much.
Yep, that's cool. And were you trying to get into sort of like your stunt on film stuff?
Some stunt on film stuff, yeah. Which was fun for a bit, but you do get injured quite a lot. I was like, I'm kind of a glorified prop here. This is quite to get people, but it was fun. I mean, but I did sort of decide like this is not something I'm going to want to pursue for the long term because it's a pretty tough gig.
Yeah, I worked on like a feature film in New Zealand where there was like a professional stunt crew that had done all the stunts for what's that, Fury Road, and like they were like, I think they were extremely well paid. I think it's the kind of job if you can get into it professionally, you can do very well out of it. But I think it's also very, very tough and like extremely hard job to get.
It's true. You also have to be incredibly physically fit and very physically capable, and I'm not, to put it bluntly. I'm reasonably athletic and I like doing sort of stuff, but I'm not that coordinated, and I'm not a gymnast really. And I think to be a good stunt person, you really have to be basically capable gymnast and wrestler. Yeah.
What was the tipping point? Like, what was the one? Was there like a straw that broke the camel's back, or was it like a slow sort of like you're like, oh, I'm going to pull out of this?
Yeah, I mean, it was just like I'd done a bit of it and in my 20s, and I thought, well, this is kind of fun, but I was junior in the industry, so I was getting paid reasonably, but not like crazy money. And it's just like, was I going to pursue this as a career or not, or was I going to do something else? And I sort of thought, well, okay, I think maybe I'd like to use my brain as well as my body. So yeah. Cool.
And that's a good segue into moving, using your brain there. So you used your brain to get more into the video business. And like, I guess from there, you started to sort of find a role for yourself, which was like video strategist. What was like the first couple of, your first couple of roles as a video strategist? I think you mentioned you're working at another agency.
Yeah. Yeah. I was working at an agency called Distilled, which is, part of Brain Labs now, got bought out a couple of years ago. But yeah, I was working there and we had a lot of clients, like a lot of different clients. And basically I kind of, because I knew a lot about video in the company, I became the kind of specialist and just ended up helping clients out with working out the questions at the time, which were like, how do I get a video on my website? Where do I put it? How do I embed it? What's the best way to, ensure we're not going to slow down the website? All stuff that's still to some extent relevant, but perhaps less of a problem than it was at the time. Questions around, well, what do we do on YouTube? What should be in a video? All that kind of stuff. So we had a lot of clients, a whole bunch of clients that I was working for there. And yeah, that was kind of fun. So there was a lot of sort of kind of exposure to different businesses and the kind of problems they had, and just being able to kind of work in that way across all these companies gave me a really broad start, because there are problems that there wasn't an established answer to, that I had to work out the answer to, basically. So it requires a lot of messing around, a lot of experimentation, a lot of thinking, a lot of trying out new stuff, I suppose.
I first became exposed to you from Wistia. I remember working as an in-house video producer, and I couldn't believe some of the stuff that Wistia was creating, especially in terms of how to improve your video production, or sort of tutorials you guys were making. And how did you get started at Wistia, and what was your journey there?
Yeah, so when I was at Distilled, I basically got headhunted by Wistia, and they were like, come on board, come work with us. Because they had great production skills. They had really good team. I mean, they still do. Chris, Dan, and Steve, who work there, are absolutely phenomenal. And they kind of wanted someone who was knew more of the strategy side and was able to kind of do some of the public communication around what they were doing with their product, and to kind of fill that gap. So I went and worked there for about 5 years in-house. So that was that.
Nice. And then after that, you started your own sort of thing, or became sort of like a contractor?
Well, actually, I kind of left because I had to have a bunch of surgeries that basically knocked me out for about 2 years. So I've only kind of been back in the world of work for a sort of year and a half since then. But exactly. I've been doing my own thing, consulting, helping businesses with their strategy, and probably launching at the moment, launching my own agency formally in a few months' time.
Yeah. What was the surgeries, man? What happened?
I had a series of jaw surgery. So I used to have problems breathing, and I had really bad sleep apnea, which for someone of my age and weight was quite unusual. So I had to have basically it's a bit grim, but my jaw broken and expanded a few different times in a few different ways to sort of increase the size of my airway. To allow me to breathe better. So it was a long process, and there's a few things that went wrong in the journey. So I was it was kind of, I started it in the pandemic. I thought, right, now's as good a time as any, because I knew that I was going to have to probably do this eventually. So 2020 to 2022 was basically just me lying in bed. So I'm still recovering from that a little bit, but in pretty good shape now.
Yeah, your jaw looks much better now.
Thank you. I feel a bit different. My jaw used to be here, and it's now here. So occasionally I'll go to pour a drink or something and just pour it all over myself, because my sort of muscle memory is forgotten. But it's a very weird experience, because you have one face for 35 years, and then suddenly you have another one. But maybe I'll write or do something about it at some point. But not many people have been through that surgery. But
was it a maxillofacial surgeon, or like a?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Nice. Awesome. Yeah. Cool. And sorry, back to Wistia. So I think that one of the first videos, sort of series that I was most impressed by, was 110-100. Were you part of that series, or like a?
It was, yeah. I worked on the team that were part of the strategy and the creative and the distribution for that. Yeah, there's a team of about sort of only about, I think, 5-6 of us working on it. Producer, creative director, a couple of cinematographers. Me doing sort of strategy and distribution, somebody else working on sort of paid media and kind of supporting assets. And that was us.
I loved it. I was glued to the screen, and it was one of the first sort of series about video production that I had ever seen. And I was just I can't believe people are making things like this. This is awesome. Why are not more people making this kind of stuff?
Yeah, it was cool. It hit a few different notes in that it was about the process of making video production, but in itself was a sort of a pitch for what businesses should be doing in terms of bigger creative, which I still think a lot of, and you see this now, a lot of businesses doing podcasts, a lot of businesses doing, what we call brand affinity marketing, but it's basically the stuff that is there to build that audience, get people to like you, get that sort of, that core fan base and get these super fans who really are engaged in your business. And I think that big content like that is great at doing it. And I think a lot of businesses would have previously invested that amount of money in ads, and I just don't think that in any way has the same level of brand impact, particularly B2B businesses at that kind of at that emotional level, because an ad lasts a few minutes and you might like it, but it's very hit and miss with ads oftentimes. Whereas if you make something that's a bit longer that really speaks to the essential needs that people have, then I think that's something that can really last and build your brand in a more meaningful way. And we did that 5 years ago, and we're still talking about it now. So it's those kind of big pieces do work well, and that was a great example of it, I think.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot to unpack about what you just said there. But can we start with brand affinity, just for people who have never seen any of of what you've talked about there? Could you just explain to us what brand affinity is and why it's important?
Yeah, so brand affinity as a term was often used historically to describe kind of purchasing intent, repeat purchasing intent. So often it'd be like if someone goes into a supermarket and they see all these things on the shelves, why are they going to go to you versus others? And people would measure that kind of thing. But I think in a more modern sense, like it's a broader term that I think can be used to describe like whether people like you and what their sort of emotional connection to you as a business is, but a little bit broader than just a product, so it's not, if we think about the fact that brands and products are obviously integrated and tied together, there's also a sort of a differentiation in sort of sometimes your product marketing and your brand marketing. And I think this is about sort of, well, how do you build that brand that irrespective of the product that you're offering, people really like and they want to go to and they know what's going on. And that essentially is what brand affinity marketing is all about. It's like getting people to like you. And oftentimes the way to get people to like you in life and in business is to get them to spend time with you. And a great way of getting them, so there's lots of ways you can do that. You can, build conferences, you can do fun stuff, you can go into their office and chat to them, you can make friends. But probably the more scalable way to do that is with long form video and long form audio, but particularly video, because it kind of is perhaps a more emotional connection that you can build through, seeing faces and that kind of thing. And that long form creative that's really going to be something that people decide to invest their time in. And if they've invested their time and energy in something that you've made, they're far more likely to connect positively with you, particularly if they enjoyed watching it. And that memory will linger and they'll be like, okay, we really like this business. People connected to their mission, to what they're about. And we can all reel off the businesses that we really feel are ones that connect with us and what we're about and who we feel part of our identity is represented by them in some sense. And I think that is really what brand affinity is all about. It's about building up that level of connection. And it's usually about building a connection with like a very deep connection with a small number of people. I think a lot of times brand marketing becomes about, we want to get a very shallow connection with a huge number of people. And I think in the modern world where you've got, 1,000,001 ads all the time, everyone's being battered by messages. It's just, everything's short form, everything's transitory. The other side of that is you get a lot more value when you really focus on a very deep connection with a few people, because that is the thing that really spreads word of mouth and builds your brand for long term. And I've seen this play out with, thousands of businesses now, where if they invest in something bigger that is about connection with a few people, that has long-term impacts far beyond a similarly priced ad campaign that involves a heavy amount of paid distribution, etc.
Yeah, I think in preparation for this podcast, I think I watched one of your your talks about the difference between the amount of money you can spend on an ad campaign versus like a series. And I think like the example you gave was I can't remember, it was something silly, like making like a silly cat video or a silly dog video. And you see that so much now in advertising. It's like I think people have taken that like that Old Spice commercial with that guy. Like it's like every ad is trying to be like that now. And so because every ad is trying to be like that, none of them are now memorable. And you've just got this, like everything's just like, what's the one with like, insurance ads are just, you just like, it's like a meerkat, or there's like the one about the time one. And you're like, this doesn't make, it doesn't make any sense at all. But like, I think some of those ads can still be impactful. You think of like Cadbury, like the gorilla playing the drums. Like maybe that was like revolutionary for its time. But as you say, ad campaigns are just like crazy now, and they go in one ear and out the next, and then you forget them a minute later. So I'm as someone who's producing a podcast, I completely agree with what you're saying about people spend more time listening to a series which is more targeted towards them.
I think it also depends, like, there's obviously a mix of both. I think it does split B2B, B2C a little bit as well. Particularly B2B, I think it's much more useful to focus on that, deep connection with a few people, because your customer base is inherently more narrow. Whereas if you are Cadbury, if you are a big consumer brand that actually exactly what you want is a shallow connection with lots of people because you want them to buy a chocolate bar when they go to the supermarket, then a kind of wide-ranging viral ad campaign is possibly exactly what you want to go for. The problem is that most businesses are trying to replicate that strategy that might be appropriate just for a few big corporate B2C companies with huge budgets. Like everyone's trying to be Nike. And Nike's strategy is not appropriate for most businesses. It's certainly not appropriate for banks and things, and they always do this. But I think that I'm quite negative on a lot of the advertising industry, because I think that when, I've sat in a number of boardrooms, and I've been involved in a number of agencies over the years, and what I see is a lot of inertia, a lot of lack of critical thinking, and a lot of money going where people feel it's safe to spend it because they get these numbers on a paper that tells them someone watched it, but in reality, nobody cares. And that inertia and fear, I think, is driving what is often quite poor investments that would be better spent elsewhere. No, it's not to say there aren't great. Of course, there's great ads, there's great campaigns, and advertising as a medium is always going to be valuable. But I think that at the moment, there's a huge overinvestment in that with bad creative. That comes from just a very, very bad process. And so I'm going to rant about this for a while. There's another problem with the ad industry in that they expect people to pitch for free and then do the work for paid. So what agencies end up doing is putting all their best people on the pitch and then all their junior people on the actual delivery usually. And what then happens is that people buy the pitch that they want based on what they think is going to work for them, what they fancy, but not actually what is the right thing to do. And it's just incredibly bad way of doing it. It brings out the worst in the agency, it brings out the worst in the client. And then they've committed to spending money on often what is very bad creative, and the strategy problems are then come to the fore after the pitch, and you've already committed to an idea, and that's, it just always breaks. I just don't get it.
Yeah,
I need to come up with the strategy and then go and do it.
Yeah, I've certainly had problems with pitching an idea, and then you can send that idea to like a third party agency to try and make it, and like the delivery is like, you're just like, look, this is not what we were asking for, which is certainly like quite frustrating. But I certainly also have felt the pain of like pitching for free. Like I run a video production agency myself, like a production house, and you pitch for free, and you're like, we spent about 2 days pitching that, and don't get anything back for it, and you're like, well, is this worth it? You're putting in a lot of like effort into it.
Yeah, well, exactly. I refuse. I don't pitch creative for free. I won't do it because I will build the creative based on a quite deliberative process of working out the strategy of the business, often involving some really like difficult conversations around strategy, because most businesses need to like usually resolve some internal questions around strategy before they can really commit to creative. So for me, that's part of the process. And if businesses want to work with me, they have to accept that the creative, I'll pitch them creative ideas later down the line, but they don't get that for free. The strategy process comes and they pay for a strategy and the pitch. If they then decide they don't like the ideas and want to go elsewhere, that's fine. But at least I've then done the work to set the foundation that gives them a good strategy to work from. What you can't do is try and do a strategy for free.
I think that's a good idea. I think a lot of like places should be moving towards doing that. I think certainly I myself would like to move to like doing that as well.
It's challenging because a lot of clients don't want that. They want the free stuff.
They're like, no, just give us the idea, and then like you give them the idea, and then they use the idea with someone else, and you're like, what? That was my idea. What are you doing? So so can we just go back to views? This is another like very complex topic, and you've talked about it in your talks as well. But like, how different platforms use views and how they sort of like, grade it as a view. I think you mentioned like Facebook, if you scroll past it and the video happens to play, then that's counted as a view. And like Instagram has others, YouTube has others as well. I remember trying to sort of like find out what engagement meant for LinkedIn video. And I actually just couldn't nail it down. I was like, there is no actual metric that LinkedIn uses as like specific engagement. And they use things like, including like comments, including likes. And I'm like, well, how are you supposed to, there's no, it's very hard to sort of get like a complex, a right set of analytics these days, I think, or like a standard.
Yeah. Completely. They're all lying to us. And they know they're lying to us because the moment that they told us the truth, we'd stop spending money because it's a huge Ponzi scheme advertising at the moment because they're all marking their own homework. Think about it. It's like, how much you're paying per view, and then they tell you how many views they've got. And it's crazy. How have we accepted this situation? But
yeah,
we seem to have done. But I think it's all going to break down eventually because it's just businesses are going to start to realize that this doesn't translate and it's all nonsense. But there's a sort of the advertising agencies who are paid based on media spend, percentage of media spend, are kind of committed to upholding this model. Now, credit where credit's due. YouTube, I think, lie the least. And they do offer, I think, the most transparent view, and that's not too bad. So I give YouTube a bit of credit there. TikTok's the worst. TikTok, 1 million views, and the people who still, it's nothing. It doesn't mean anything. It's numbers on the screen. It's almost all bots or fabrications. It's just vague impressions. It's because TikTok just throws stuff all the time. Just loads up things, and if it loads, it's basically a load to any sort of browser connected to any device is considered a view. Doesn't mean anything. So it's all a big Ponzi scheme. And I think that it's fascinating that it's a very frustrating point to me that as humans, we haven't seemed to have seen past that psychology and we just seem to go along with this. But it's bizarre. I find it absolutely bizarre. So all these numbers are just I just don't think they're that important because they are fabrications and they're not true reflections of reality in almost any meaningful sense.
Yeah, I think was it you who said the number of impressions does not equal the number of people impressed?
Yes, I have used that line a few times because I think it's quite good. Yeah.
I think I think it's very true, and I think some of your strategy is saying, listen, instead of uploading your stuff for free to platforms like YouTube or Facebook, why don't you host them on your own website and sort of use YouTube and other platforms like that as like a trailer to bring people back to your own website, so you can sort of control the views and control the analytics. And also sort of make sure that people who are on the webpage are the ones that you want to be there rather than just random people. Does this sort of lead back into how, in the past you've created sort of binge-worthy content, I think with like Brand Wagon in particular, was possibly the first sort of example of that, or like a...
Yeah, well, the 1 to 100 project was the first example of that, actually. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
For Wistia. Yeah, exactly. I mean, so I think that is a good strategy for a very specific type of content. So if you're trying to sort of build a lot of traffic, a big audience that you control, i.e. by email, I'm very pro email and I'm very pro CRM and very pro having that control. YouTube's great and I love YouTube, but that when you have your entire audience on one platform, you are subject to slight shifts in the platform completely ruining everything. And for a creator, maybe that's not such a problem. For a business, I think that's not necessarily wise. So you need to sort of think about how you can simultaneously build up your audience on the social video platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, wherever else, TikTok if you want. And then you need to start to think about how you then translate that into something more commercially relevant, which is ultimately, in most cases, going to be about traffic. So so I think there's therefore a hybrid strategy of having some content on social channels, some content that's exclusively just to your website, and also particularly for content that doesn't work on social channels, like some product videos, some more conversion oriented stuff that really doesn't make sense outside the context of a certain page. You don't want that on YouTube or other platforms. You want that on your website, and that's where other platforms can be very valuable. And so I think it's about it's balancing control and distribution. And just making sure you've got a strategy for both ends of that.
Yeah. So when you go into a company when they hire you as a consultant, are you coming in saying it's like no, stop doing that, get that off there, bring it over here? Is that kind of like what your role, or are you sort of much more gentle, where you're like, hey, listen, from my research, I think we should be doing something more like this, or like a...
I don't know. I guess it depends on the business, right? Sometimes they're kind of bought in on the process, and I can be a lot more blunt and just go, right, here's what I was just doing. Sometimes the business needs a bit more handholding. So yeah, it depends. But oftentimes I'll just go in and say, well, the first thing is working out where we're at now. What have we got that's good? What's working? Where are the gaps? What are we missing? And just trying to fill the gaps and make sure that there's a process in place to sort of do that. So some businesses will have some really good product videos and webinars, and that's okay, great. Well, that's working, but how do we then expand that to get more reach and get build more of an audience? Or some people have very good training content and good, really excellent YouTube channel, and it's okay. Well, how do we then turn that YouTube channel into something a bit more commercially valuable? So there's all those sort of questions that are very business centric, and it depends what state the business is in, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. And I think that leads nicely into sort of, I think you talked a little bit how to build a YouTube channel. I think one of your talks started with, if you're like a bike brand, what kind of videos you should be making. Just say you're like a regular Joe, a company starting out, perhaps in the finance space. where would you start trying to build a channel? And would you focus building a YouTube channel anyway in the first place at all?
Gosh, so in the finance space, that's an interesting. So a lot of this is quite industry specific. Finance space is an interesting one because they're so heavily regulated, particularly in the UK, that it's there's certain things you can and can't do that make it quite challenging. I think that if I would if you're going to do YouTube finance stuff, it's got to be personality driven. So you need a host, you need a individual who's going to be that sort of front of your brand, and you've got to think about a medium. Maybe it's interviews, maybe it's webinars, maybe whatever that's really going to help kind of drive that thing. So you need to work out what that host is good at and what you could do for them. You could do presentations, you could do like panels, that kind of stuff. But it's like you have to find that level of, you can't offer like financial advice, so you have to sort of like find a way around that, where you can have conversations that is not you saying buy this, buy that. So that's an interesting challenge. And then on your website you have a little bit more leeway perhaps, but yeah, you've got to think about stuff that's maybe more conversion centric, stuff that's more about how do you get people through whatever funnel you have set up dependent on the product. So yeah, there's a lot that depends on the overall business and the industry and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so it kind of depends what the business wants to achieve as well.
Yeah. Okay. What are some common misconceptions that people often make when they're sort of starting to build content, or say a YouTube channel, or content like that?
YouTube channel, I think the misconception is that I think the thing that people get wrong most is they think that their brand on YouTube is a meaningful value proposition for YouTube. Nobody cares. Like I'm not going to follow. There's no brand in the world that if they have a YouTube channel, I'm going to go, that's great, I'll follow that because I care about everything they're going to make. You have to think a bit like more specific than that and go, well, what is the value proposition of this YouTube channel? Who am I speaking to? And why should anyone care? And you have to get really clear on that. So that means having a more focused content strategy for YouTube. And I think that means articulating what it is that you're doing, what you're creating, and who's it for, and what problem you're solving. And that might mean branding the YouTube channel differently to just your business name. Because again, you have to sort of think about all the great YouTube channels out there. There's something in that name that is its own brand that you know what you're getting. If you go to that channel, you have an idea about what that particular content is going to be. And I think that's where you need to kind of start to think in terms of where YouTube channels are at and how that works. So first, that's the mistake that most people make. Start with the other one is like they put every video they've got in the world on YouTube. And again, it's like YouTube is a platform that grows based on like the average amount of people watching, the subscription rates, the performance of all your content. If you flood your channel with crap, if you flood it with like stuff that is, your corporate overview videos from the last shareholder meeting, no one will be interested in that. So you've got to be far more specific and thoughtful and lean and mean about it. And great YouTube channels are very focused, and they are very they're very specific, and they have an identity, and it's giving your channel that level of brand and identity that sits alongside your broader corporate brand that allows you to sort of really fly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of general marketing teams don't have much of an idea about how to build a YouTube channel in particular. I think, as you say, they just flood it with whatever, like event videos, like things like that, things that people might watch for like a week and then never see again in their lives. So I guess what you said back there was like you can potentially build a YouTube channel which has a different brand than your own normal brand. Like how far different could you go? So just say you. I'm not sure, we could use an example, perhaps like a finance example. You've got a massive top 4 company. How would you differentiate your YouTube channel brand from the company to sort of make sure that it's going to stand out, but still try and retain a little bit of those sort of core values?
Yeah, I mean, so there's the naming, there's the content type, and then there's the aesthetic. So the naming, for example, you can go quite broad with that, so you can really push it far. So perhaps if it's finance, let's say we've got a host who's doing interviews, right? You keep it really simple. Well, then you ground the brand in that host. So it's like interviews with X, Y, and Z from Y or whatever. And then the aesthetics is like, make sure you've got your brand colors in it, make sure you've got the brand logo, you're really anchoring all of the colors within that brand, and you make sure that you are referencing the business as you go through, but you're really giving it that separate identity that allows it to stand out. So like the Wistia example, Brand Wagon's a good one, right? So we did that series. That could be its own YouTube channel. We decided a slightly different strategy on that, but that would work. There's one There's another series they've got called Talking Too Loud, which is, again, it is anchored in the brand, but it's got its own like series identity. And you would know if you're watching it that it's, all the people involved are from the business. There is clear references to the business. It's like all of that is anchored in the content, but it's still got its own separate entity. And I think that's the sort of thing you need to start to think about. So it's like TV. So, video is ultimately TV. And if you think about a TV series, maybe your business is like HBO, and you need to think about the naming the series a bit differently, but you have a kind of through line of style and aesthetic that grounds it. Got it.
And can you have more than one audience on a channel?
I think that's difficult. Usually you need one channel per audience. So you can have multiple YouTube channels, but you need to get clear on who you're speaking to. And if the audience is very disparate, if they don't really have shared interests, then you're not going to be able to really speak to them both on one channel. Because again, what you need is subscribers, and you need people coming back to watch stuff regularly. The ideal situation, your YouTube channel is going to really fly when you get subscribers and they watch everything you do. So that's what you need to aim for. And that necessitates picking an audience usually.
Yeah, as you say, like I think you mentioned earlier, like I've never subscribed to a channel and then been like, I just can't wait until they release the next piece of content. I'm going to wait around on YouTube until it comes out. I think people sort of like subscribe and then kind of subscribe and forget, and then hope that YouTube recommends it to them later on because it knows it likes them.
There are some channels, like if I get a notification on my phone, I will go and watch it immediately because I'm that invested in what they're doing. Not many businesses, it might be said, but yeah.
What kind of content do you need on a channel to sort of make it successful? You mentioned like, you need to have all those basic sort of tenets in the first place. But do you need to be making different sort of like shows on the same channel? Like, would you even advise that? Or would you say like separate a show to build another channel? Or could you have sort of like sort of funner, smaller, more broader range videos on your channel, as well as more sort of like core, longer form sort of like podcast contents as well? Yeah, on YouTube, or just sort of like trying to build a following in general.
I think ultimately you need all three, right? You need different kinds of content. So you need there's a framework that I use called Serial, Service, and Spark, which is basically you need that content that is serialized, that regular publishing stuff that's like the podcast. So it's regular stuff's coming out every few weeks, but whatever it's going to be. That longer form stuff usually that's going to be there primarily for subscribers. You then need the service content that's there to capture latent demand, so what people are searching for. So that's really like solving problems, answering questions, shorter things, maybe tutorials, maybe just fun snippets, whatever it might be. And then you need that content that's really going to be highly shareable. So that's the Spark content that's going to trigger emotion. So that's going to be a bit more clickbaity, maybe a bit more focused on capturing immediate interest on Facebook or Twitter through autoplay. Might be advertorial, might be whatever, but shorter stuff that's really there to sort of expand reach. So you've got stuff for engagement. You've got stuff to capture demand, and then you've got stuff to like expand reach through sharing. If you've got those three things, then you're laughing.
Yeah, I have 100% bought into that theory, and I think it's absolutely true. But when I try and explain that to people, especially people that like marketing people at companies, they sort of look at me like I'm crazy, and like sort of like a 1,000-yard stare back. Do you have a strategy for trying to explain this to people in a way that they can understand, rather than I feel like I'm just bombarding them with information and they're like.
So do you find that it's because is that usually because there's only one kind of content that they think makes sense, or?
I honestly think so I think what the level that you're trying to explain this to people is like a level 2 or level 3 sort of concept. And I think most people are stuck on, okay, we're going to make a video. Okay, what is it going to be about? Oh, we're going to an event. Okay, the video is about the event. And there's no further creative decision made beyond that. And you're trying to convince them to make something which is like, why don't we make some fun sort of Vanity Fair Condé Nast style videos like Wired? And they're like, listen, we just need an event video. How you're trying to convince them on something that it's sort of like beyond the pale for them.
Yeah, well, I think it's a case of like determining where the business is at. So obviously, I'm talking like kind of ideal world where I think people are going to build towards. But I remember 10 years ago just pitching the idea that anyone would do business video at all was deemed with that's crazy. Why would we invest in video? That's expensive.
Really?
Yeah. So you got to think of like, so I'm always sort of thinking, well, what where things are going and how to pitch it down the line. But I think also if a business is at the point where they are literally just like, we need an event video, obviously you're not going to pitch them a long form series and a viral thing. So you got to kind of know where they're at and work out what they need to be doing. But also I think that for me, it's like I always then go back to, well, okay, well, what made you think you needed this video in the first place? And often that is a revealing of question that will reveal sort of where they're at in terms of their strategic journey and what they're thinking about. So if they are, if it's just a case of, well, we thought we needed one for the event, it's like, okay, well, where did you think you were going to put this? What were you going to do with it? And that might intimate. Then they're like, well, we needed to communicate with our audience, and we thought this would be a good way to show that we're doing really cool stuff, and we wanted to send out of our email. And then you go, okay, well, so your focus is then a CRM one. So you're trying to sort of build up that email list. You're trying to get more people excited. Okay, that's cool. Well, what else could we do to engage that email list that would be really useful? Well, that opens a question that allows you to think about what other video might be useful. So I think it's all about kind of working out where they're at and then working out what the right thing for them to do next is in their journey. But yeah, but certain businesses, B2B businesses particularly, are never going to, like, you pitch sort of, fun, crazy content, and they're like, we're not a fun business, we're a very boring business. And you're okay. So that's always then, okay, well, let's do some really good, boring stuff. So I always like, you try and work out where they are. Don't try and pitch it's like Nike campaign to a small B2B service company, because it's never going to fly. But equally, don't try and go. But the other reverse problem I have there is you'll go to some companies that are just used to spending loads of money on ads, and they'll do, and they're like, everything's social. We don't do website stuff. We don't care about that. We only really do social media video, and they'll spend a fortune. And then you go, well, why don't we just try and do something a little bit more around our existing audience and trying to capture that email address and demand. And that's also a tough pitch. But I think, you have to sort of work at where people are at and try and get them to just think slightly differently in a broader direction.
Yeah, I actually encountered that same problem where you're trying to pitch something a bit more exciting to like a very boring brand, and the brand is like, no, we're boring, and you're like, well, you don't have to be boring, like you're still allowed to like make a video that's engaging. And I think for them, they're kind of like, they're stuck in the mindset that like, this is change. We don't like change. Therefore, we're not going to change to do this. And like, why would we ever, consider making anything that people would want to watch? It's you kind of like you're almost trying to break people's mindsets about it. And you're fighting against the tide. It's fighting against, it's a tough, can be an uphill battle.
I'm knowing to walk away. Like I walk away all the time from businesses where I think you're not ready, we're not going to work here. So like there's some tech companies, for example, that basically don't believe in marketing, and they think of marketing as like an excuse for bad product, and they don't like it. So they'll go, well, we don't want to do marketing because we think we can just win by having the best product. And when they have that mindset, it's very difficult to think that they should do any marketing, because they're going to be reticent to it. And I see this a lot with like tech companies, and in such situations you just have to wait for them to sort of come to a different view on that, and they will eventually, because oftentimes it's not the best product that wins, and you do need a bit of marketing as well. You need good product, but you can't just rely on good product and word of mouth all the time. You do need something a bit bigger than that. So yeah, it's all about working out where people are at, and I say no to people all the time.
Nice one. I should start doing that too. Okay, so how can I repurpose my old boring YouTube videos to sort of reinvigorate a channel? I have some.
So I mean, it depends what you've got, but you've got to first work out what that channel value proposition is. So let's say, well, what have we made, and who's this for, and how can we really position it and frame it in a way that's going to meet the need of what they've got. You then need to remove all the stuff that isn't relevant to that particular strategy once you've got it. So get your channel lean and mean, and then expand from there. You can also think about the videos that you've got that maybe could be chopped up. So longer form stuff that maybe there's good clips in there that you can turn to trailers, that you can turn into short form stuff. YouTube Shorts is great for that. Like really quick videos that are trailers and summaries of other videos, and then link to the longer one is a lovely way to do it. So there's lots of ways to take that content and expand out a bit more. But I think the starting point is looking at what you've got and then saying, well, who's this for, and what problem are we solving?
Got it. And in terms of building it like an audience, do you think that views are more important than subscribers? Like, when you think of some sort of content creators out there who claim to only be interested in views, like, think of people like Mr. Beast these days, who sort of like, I think his whole strategy is that like, we just want people to click no matter what, and we're going to try and shock people into clicking. Do you think that is a long-term strategy, or do you think actually, people should be going for the subscribers rather than just pure views?
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Beast has millions of subscribers, so I'm not sure that his strategy is not to have views. I mean, I think he's just got the strategy of a good channel down very, very well, and has a very good yeah, just he's optimized all parts of the process effectively, and there's built a very good channel as a consequence. So I think there's certainly a strategy to go for just like we want to go for reach, but I don't think it's appropriate for most businesses, because for most businesses, if you're working in that space, you have an audience and you have a product, and you have your goal is not just everyone looking at it. If your goal is you just want to monetize the content, then yeah, views can be a way to sort of do that if your goal is just revenue from YouTube advertising. But that's rarely the goal of any business. So when I work with businesses, I don't tend to work with creators, I tend to work with businesses. So to that extent, it's a case of saying, well, no, you've got to get clear on the audience. You've got to make sure that you're speaking to the right people. And that means that your strategy is necessarily more about building that audience, and that means subscribers to some extent. Views matter, but views matter from the right people. And what really matters is like high quality views. So I don't care about pure view counts, but what I do care about is like what the average retention rate is of videos, and making sure that we're getting views from the right people in the right place and the right sort of demographics, etc. And yeah, go from there.
Yeah, I think I watched a series. I can't remember what it was called, from Wistia. It was about. I think you interviewed one of the main content creators from Moz, the Whiteboard Fridays guy. I can't remember his name.
Rowan Fishkin, yeah.
Yeah, and essentially he said the same thing. It was just like, look, I'm just trying to build like the views that matter, right? Like the super fans. But he also said that he plugged away at creating a video series for like 2 or 3 years and got absolutely no traction at all. I think if that was me, I'd be like, well, I've been making this for 2 years. No one's watched it. How do you convince yourself to keep making content if after 2 years you get nothing back at all?
Well, you should get something back. I think, and I think if Rand did get something back in those years, it just didn't really fly. So it was a slow burn, right? But it was getting some views, and it was starting to compound.
Yeah.
And I think that is the question that you got to kind of look at that journey, and you can map out like. Often what I do with if I'm working with a new YouTube channel, I will basically look at their performance, the average other performance of channels in their niche and industry, and I'll map out a trajectory for what I think is reasonable growth. And we will map progress against that trajectory. And what you always find is that trajectory is slow, and then it really kicks in. And that takes a while. But what you then do is you set the benchmarks to say, well, are we heading in the right direction? And I think that's the key thing. And yeah, it may only be, you may for the first year only get a few hundred views per video. But if it's growing steadily, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter if it's small numbers can soon compound to big numbers, but what you want to see is that growth. Slow and steady is great.
And when you come into a business, do you do a little bit of research with the company to try and find out what is the core audience that you're trying to target in the first place, or do you just hope that they kind of know that and then you can sort of start from the ground running, or like a? No.
If they don't know who they're going after, and they don't know what their value proposition is, and they don't know who they are, then there's not much I can do. So I will have to, they need to, I can work with them to refine that stuff. But there's foundational levels of business strategy that you really need to be effective at video. And the other side of that, video can be a good way into those tough questions. So oftentimes I work with businesses and we'll sit down and the video can be a lens through which we try and answer some of these really difficult questions that have eluded them from a strategy standpoint, and maybe they haven't actually answered. And sometimes that is a lot of friction and conflict, because businesses are often scared of making decisions, because strategy is all about saying what you're not going to do, and it's all about no's and saying no, we don't care about these people, we're going after this. And being that focused is cognitively and psychologically quite challenging oftentimes, because you need to say no to stuff. You need to take opportunities off the table that feels like it's it feels risky. It feels risky to focus. It isn't risky. It's far riskier to not focus. But we really feel like that optionality that we have, we're going after everyone. We want all customers and we don't care. We feel like that is safe, but it isn't. And I think that is often a challenge that you have to resolve with businesses. And then there'll be challenges and there'll be disagreements in the business to say, some will be like, well, I don't want to make that strategy. I want to do something different. And that's where you have to force alignment. But I think that is the foundation of good business strategy beyond video itself. But yeah, certainly video can be a good way to force those conversations, I think. But you have to be willing to do that. And luckily I am. But yeah, for a lot of businesses, a lot of video agencies, like they don't want to have to deal with that sort of level of stuff before they even get to production stage. And a lot of companies think that they're buying creative, but oftentimes I think if you're buying good creative, that should necessitate strategy as part of it.
I mean, that's probably why you're so valuable, because you can actually do that kind of thing. So just say you go into a business and they say, we don't know what our target audience is. How would you go about approaching or trying to refine who they're trying to go after?
Yeah, well, I would normally come to them and go, okay, here are some options. Let's pick one.
Just say you go into a business and they don't know what their target audience is, who they should be targeting. How would you go about helping them trying to refine or drill down about the people they want to target?
So normally I'll come up with some options and say, okay, well, I'm going to come to you with some options for who we could target, and we're going to pick one, and we're going to align the business around that. And that doesn't necessarily mean we have to change the whole business or anything, but it just means we have to verbally commit to an audience that we're going to go after from a marketing standpoint. And that's what we're doing. And so that's where it goes, really. So I'll normally do the research, have a think, come up with some options. They may then disagree with all the options, and then we refine it and come up with the right answer. But it's often my job in that situation to be a bit of a hard ass, because oftentimes the caveats will come in and be like, oh, well, we want this people, but also this people, but also this people. And it's usually my job then to try and force the conversation that leads us to a really clear focus and strategy, because that makes my job easier. And if I don't have a clarity of who I'm going after and what they care about to start with, I can't make a good video. And I can't build a good strategy around that. It's not possible. It's the foundation of really, all good creative strategy. So it's important for me to do that. And if I can't do that, then I'll probably walk away at that stage. But usually I'll come up with some options. We'll debate them. We'll refine them. And we'll either align around a decision or we'll not, and I'll walk away. But usually that process is a good one. It's usually quite difficult for businesses if they haven't done that before, but it's usually quite valuable. And at the end of it, we end up with a really good place that everybody's excited by, because there's clarity and there's focus.
I was just going to say, so essentially they have 4 core, types of audience, and you'll say, okay, we can't target all 4. Let's just choose one, and you'll focus on just that sort of one core piece of the audience.
Yeah, usually. And often there's the product audience and the brand audience are going to be different for certain things. So oftentimes you don't want to just target your potential customers on YouTube. You want to target the people that you really want to watch the videos are the influencers, the people who are going to start to recommend your product or your service to others. So that can often be a slightly more refined or different service. For B2C, it's usually more narrow. For B2B, it's normally more broad. So for example, let's say I'm Nike or something. The people who are going to recommend running shorts are your people who run marathons, for example. But that's not your core people who are purchasing them, are actually people who are your everyday people going to the gym. So that's a slightly different demographic there, or a slightly different sort of psychographic and slightly different things. So you have to pitch and say, well, for our creative content, we're going to go after the really hardcore fans. And we know that they, through their wider social networks, are the people that everyone asks, what should I buy? Similarly, if for B2B, it's often, your audience is usually broader. So I might go, well, let's say I've got a piece of marketing software and I know that it's only going to be bought by a small number of businesses using a certain number of technology who have this and Y job roles. But the wider function that you have is going to be recommended by, C-suite professionals across the board. So you need to therefore target slightly broader and think more specifically about who you're going after and try and capture that audience. So for Wistia, for example, a huge number of, most of the customers are not video production agencies. Most of the customers are marketing people, but a lot of the marketing is towards video production companies, because they're the people that recommend to in-house people, as I'm sure you've done many times, what hosting service they should be using.
That was me. I was recommending them, but we were on Vimeo, and I was like, okay, can we migrate Wistia? And I was like, oh my god, it's such a massive.
There we go. And I bet if I drew down and say, why is that? Part of it might be the functionality of the product, but probably most of it is just because you like the brand.
I love the brand. I was like, I can't get enough of them, So there you go. That was me. Okay, so can we go a little bit more into getting people to watch your video? So I think you talk a little bit about thumbnails, and I think thumbnails have become much more important in the last sort of a few years specifically. Why are thumbnails important to you, and sort of how can you measure success of a thumbnail?
So a YouTube thumbnail, you measure success via impressions click-through rate, which is a metric you get in YouTube analytics. Basically, it tells you how many times when someone saw your video in the search results or the sidebar did they click on it. Nice and simple. And you want to see that relative to other videos in your channel and your industry. You want to see that go up. So for example, anything above, as a ballpark, 5 to 10% is usually pretty good. Less than 5%, maybe not great. Over 10%, very, very good. So yeah, that's kind of where you're at with that. You can measure the same kind of thing in Google search. So if you're hosting videos elsewhere and you're measuring traffic to your website, again, you can measure the click-through rate using Google Search Console. And those are probably the most important metrics to look at. Thumbnails are very important because they, they're like an ad they're like a movie poster. They add and indicate what people are going to see. So you generally want bold colors. You want some text can sometimes be useful if you want to add a bit of subtext or context or additional sort of information that's going to appeal and get people intrigued. There's not really a right or wrong way to do thumbnails, like in terms of what you include. Sometimes you might have a face if it's talking head video. If it's like a close up on an object, that might be useful. You might have an action shot. There's lots of things you could put in there. But generally, the things that work very well from my studies have been high contrast colors and a lot of clarity. So people, you want to reduce cognitive load. People need to be able to see the thumbnail very quickly, know what they're getting, and know whether or not it's for them.
Yeah. Do you need to have a crazy expression? Do you need to be like,
no.
Okay. I feel like half the thumbnails I see out there, it's like every single thumbnail is a crazy expression.
A review video for a pillow. Oh my God, it's great. It's just all that stuff. No, you don't need that. You can think a bit more creatively. There's not a one. You got to think like we're doing human psychology, and people don't just like massive expressions. But what it does say is that like you need some expression probably if you're going to have a face in there, but you don't have to have a face in there. But what you don't want is just somebody looking really dull and like you've got to think a bit more than that. But yeah, the bizarre sort of giant expressive face on a bold color is kind of like people who've taken some of the principles that work and just applied them without thought or strategy.
Yeah. I feel like I actively avoid clicking on those now. I'm like, I can't do it.
Yeah.
That's going to be
it's an indication that they haven't really thought about the video.
Yeah. So you're saying emotion does really, really matter. I think in some of your talks, you talked about how emotional reactions matter as well. Could you just talk to us a little bit about perhaps, why do emotional reactions matter and what are they and how you can measure them?
Like emotion's an important part of it, and video is inherently a kind of emotional medium because it integrates the three different sort of art types of literature, visual art, and music. So it's a very immediate thing. So you're naturally connected quite emotionally in that regard. But no, certainly, for product videos and stuff, you don't need to be connected with emotionally necessarily. But I do think if you can speak to their interests emotionally, if you can hook into like core true emotional motivations, it's far more powerful than trying to make a rational case for stuff usually. Mm-hmm. And so I think video is a very good space to think about using making emotional arguments for products rather than trying to make rational ones. Don't have like a bullet point list of here's why you should buy this product. You've got to tell a story that gets people along there. So I think story is always important, and story is certainly naturally going to be grounded usually in emotion in some form. But I don't think you need to worry too much about like triggering emotions in sort of a specific like clickbaity kind of way necessarily. That can be useful to get those clicks, but really you're trying to take people on a journey. And that journey is going to differ depending on the kind of video and what you're going after. But yeah, I think as always, like great emotion often comes from just good storytelling and not necessarily just saccharine music. So there's a kind of combination there, and obviously it depends what you're doing. If you're doing charity videos, you can obviously play a lot more into that. If you're doing trying to tell a story of someone who's overcome, struggles and triumph, and your brand and product are sort of part of that journey, then that's great. Then you can really lean into that. But obviously not for, finance, for example.
Yeah. So you're saying I should not be using sad, folky banjo music in my finance videos anymore?
Yeah, probably. I don't know. Depends. Maybe that'd be fun.
So just going back to SEO, I think you're one of the few sort of like video creators or sort of, strategists out there who does talk about SEO. Could you just talk to us a little bit about it? Things like keywords, why would they matter? And why should we be focusing on things like that when we're making video for online?
Yeah. So I actually would probably give advice, don't worry about keywords too much, because I think when people do worry about them, they end up just doing silly things on YouTube, like coming up with really crummy titles. The thing that really matters on YouTube particularly, and on Google search to some extent, is make sure you get the clicks. And that means that it needs to be a coherent, compelling title and not really focus on keywords. And Google is far more sophisticated than that now. They understand relevancy in a far more broader sense than just keywords. So there's a sense in which you might want to do the research with for YouTube, certainly tools like vidIQ and TubeBuddy are pretty good, where you can get an overall idea of like what sort of terms might be relevant. Ahrefs is a good tool for that as well. And certainly with Google, you need to start to think about the terms that people are searching for and aligning whatever you're talking about with those terms. But I really don't think you need to do much more than that particularly. It's more where keywords might come in handy is through ideation. So what I will always like, if I'm working with a business, to come up with like some ideas for some, that service content that's really capturing latent demand. You want to know what's out there that people are searching for, that people care about, that maybe isn't being serviced by the market very well. And that will help you decide what to make. But beyond that, the keyword focus is not that important. So once you've worked out what to make, if you're making it aligned with the topic that people care about, you're good. I think way too many people worry about like trying to optimize the specific keywords of titles and stuff, and it's not really important. You can't, like, if the video is about the topic, Google can crawl the video, they can pass the transcript, they know, and they'll be able to align it. If it's not about the topic, you can't fix that by stuffing keywords and titles. So it's that simple.
Yeah, I think some content creators definitely are trying to like target a specific keyword or a specific search and just make a video like with that exact title, and then try and hope that it gets up the ratings to try and boost its views. And for me, I'm just like, that's just like the death of creativity, man. I don't.
And it's also it doesn't do anything.
Yeah,
it doesn't work. It just I doubt it's a bizarre thing. Don't worry about it. It's like, as long as you're making it about the right, the keyword research can be really helpful to illuminate opportunity for my content. So it can be a good like ideation tool. Don't worry about it past that is my advice.
Yeah. And just from a more basic level, what is SEO and why should we care about it for video in the first place?
So I suppose that there's kind of two answers to this. One is, SEO is, optimizing for search engines, right? So it's trying to get more traffic to more views from our videos that come from various forms of search engines, specifically Google, Bing, Google's YouTube, I suppose, to some extent, and increasingly other sort of platforms adjacent to that, Google Discover, maybe TikTok to some extent. So, there's a broader sense in which that all of that encompasses SEO. So it's about how you optimize the content from a sort of technical and creative standpoint to ensure that you are getting the most out of those platforms. Now, what that means practically is like, okay, well, on your website, you need to include some structured data. You need to make sure that you're optimizing a thumbnail. You need to make sure the video is in a sensible place on the page and that Google can find it and crawl it and all that kind of stuff. And then, that's basically the essential part of it. The broader question is then, we'll make sure you're ensuring you're making the right things to capture whatever particular demand is out there. And then on YouTube, it's about, okay, well, how do you make sure that you're putting all of that metadata into your videos correctly, that's going to ensure the best chance to rank and get the most content. And that doesn't mean keywords per se, but it does mean like understanding, make sure you have good descriptions, that you have maybe the right links, that you have the right that you're using the sort of hashtags there in YouTube as well, that maybe you're thinking about what you're putting in the end screens and all that kind of stuff. So there's basically, it's optimizing the meta elements to improve distribution. And I think that is, that's ostensibly it. There's also other aspects to it. So like, you can, where you embed the video and how that is going to affect things like rankings and visibility elsewhere. How you distribute it, whether you're sharing it and distributing it on multiple websites, multiple pages, all that kind of thing. So there's wider questions around on the website about where the video lives and how that impacts the search results. So there's a whole bunch of like factors and variables that you need to consider, but ultimately it's just about optimizing the elements of distribution to ensure that you get the most from search-centric platforms.
Yeah, I think I watched your Yoast presentation, and you said like just using Yoast, you can get Google to sort of like show like the chapters in the search instead of having to go to like YouTube to see the chapters. And I was like, oh my god, I had no idea about that. I think this is the part of video production that I think video producers and content creators don't focus on at all, and it's a huge part of how people find your videos. So
and I think as creators, you want your projects to be successful, and that means you got to get the distribution right, and you shouldn't think about that as somebody else's job often. You got to make sure that's all baked into the plan. So there's a lot of side of that. There's a lot of tools that you can use now to automate all that stuff and make sure that if you want to drive traffic to the website rather than YouTube, Wistia or Yoast or whatever will do that for you. So plenty of options. But it's certainly something people need to think about. And I often think you need to have the distribution plan in mind before you get to the creative. So I'll always like, I've worked out the strategy, worked out who it's for and how I'm going to distribute it before I get to working out what the content's going to be. So many times I get companies coming to me and going, hey, here's this video, can you help us optimize it? And the answer is always no. Like, I can't, this is terrible. I can't, like, you can't, forgive my language, you can't polish a turd with this stuff. You can't like, you can't make something go viral if it's bad. So that's not what that's it. But a lot of people come to it from that perspective of like, we've got some bad content. We invested in an idea that isn't very good. Can we fix this through SEO and PPC? And the answer is no. Obviously, if you could, it would be a terrible world that we all lived in that nobody would want to watch anything. But so, yeah, it's too late. If you're thinking about distribution after you've already made the video, too late.
It sounds like you're kind of reverse engineering success. So you're essentially saying, instead of like starting with creative, you're starting with the audience and then building a video back from there. And that's not how most people, especially most creatives, work. They start with the idea first. So I think it's just a new way of thinking about it. Yeah.
In my view, that's why their stuff doesn't work usually, because they've come up with an idea and they've come up with an idea for nobody in particular, and then nobody in particular wants to watch it.
Okay, cool. How do I get my videos seen?
Make sure they're covering stuff that people care about. You've got to make sure that you're optimizing all of the elements to drive clicks and traffic. And then you've got to make sure that it's very compelling, high quality content that really speaks to something meaningful that people are going to want to share and watch. So to get videos seen, you need to do everything else right, basically. I
think part of what you talk about is trying to find your nerds. I think Wistia in particular, was very heavy on this, trying to find your nerdy audience and trying to make content for them. How do you? I think this goes back into a little bit about your audience research, but like, how did you find your nerds at Wistia, and how might people go about it?
I mean, at Wistia, I guess we found the nerds just by who was hanging out, who was coming to conferences, who was commenting on blogs, who was reaching out, who was in the support, like who were the people that were engaged and chatting, who and what united them. And it was often, independent producers video producers in organizations, or people running video agencies. Okay, that's our nerds. Those are the people that really care, and we're gonna do stuff for them and try and make the best content that we can find for those people, rather than trying to do broader stuff. We did at some point try a bunch of broad stuff, but it didn't really work. So it's a case of you learn that when you really speak to the influencers, then everything else flows from that, really. So I guess, but how can you find it? I mean, Reddit's a great source, right? Go and see what subreddits are active, what people are talking about. Just go and get into these communities, go and speak to people, go to events, go and chat to individuals. Who are your best customers? What unites them? What are the things that unite the people who are most active? And I think it's that, really. It's just trying to find those little communities and subsets and subcultures that are really anchored. And what are people passionate about? Find the things that, look at your customer base. What are some things that people within that customer base are really passionate about and that unites a few of them? That is probably a community that is a very active world of nerds, in a sense, about something that you can really speak to meaningfully, that becomes a great kind of fruitful place to explore for video content and creative more broadly.
Yeah. Have you ever actually done the pub test in real life? You actually took a laptop down to a pub and then tried to show it to someone, and then you're like, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm at the pub all the time. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So you talk about the pub test where so just for people who don't know, it's you literally take a laptop into a pub, show someone who you think is your main audience, just show them the video, and then just sort of capture the reaction, just ask them what they thought about afterwards. And that's generally a good test of how successful video is going to be, or if it's on the right track.
Yeah, it's good for a few reasons. One, people are really honest in pubs, and if you've disturbed their drinking with a request, maybe offer to buy them a pint, and usually you're then getting a very they're coming at it slightly negative anyway, so they're likely to be a good skeptical audience, which is what you want. Far too many people look for confirmation bias. They're like, oh, I'll ask this sort of general friendly person like my mum or someone or a friend who's going to generally give me good advice. No, you want brutal, honest, if anything, slightly more negative than the average advice, which you're going to get in a pub. So that's usually a good place to go. So I'd recommend that as if you just and don't ask them what they think, just watch the reaction, and you'll soon tell.
Okay.
But I think often that journey will tell you what you already know. the problem is when you've been involved in a project, you lose all sense of objectivity, and you'll think something's good when it isn't. And it's a great wake up call to realize that it sucks.
Yeah, I think I'm going to try that. I've got a project I'm working on at the moment. But it's a good test.
Obviously, the caveat of that, it doesn't work for like, B2B SaaS product videos, because that's a very specific audience, right? Like, so if it's for an audience that you expect to have a level of knowledge, the pub is not that great. But if it's coming at something that like more of a YouTube thing, it works.
So like if it's like a sports brand, like you take it down to a sports bar and you made a sports pilot and you're like, what do you think of this?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Right. Got it. Okay. Awesome.
It's also good to build up a just an email list or a group of friends, people who also work in the industry, who will give you absolutely brutal feedback. I've got a few, lots of friends in that world. I've got, for example, I was just thinking of my friend Kyle, who works in sports media, and he is very good and very experienced and incredibly honest, too honest. So he's a great person to just say, Kyle, what do you think of this? And he'll tell me the truth. And he's always right. So you always know through that, like, whether or not it's going to work.
Could I send him my pitch afterwards just to see what he thinks?
Probably, yeah.
Because I'm like, I don't know if it's good.
Yeah.
Like, so. Okay, cool. Okay, so why does going viral not help your brand?
Because it's very transitory and often isn't anchored to your brand, right? It's often anchored to the creative itself. And so something might go, yeah, it has all these views and everything, but that's a very short-term thing. And it doesn't always last. And there are instances where it does, the instances where it does, like when we look to like you were mentioning earlier, the Old Spice example and stuff. The reason that works is because it's very anchored to the products in the brand. But that's a perfect kind of combination of where the creative worked and went viral, and the creative really worked for positioning and nailing the position in the market of the particular product. A lot of viral stuff doesn't have that. So it will just be a viral video that maybe is around a social cause or something else or whatever, that ultimately maybe the message isn't really about your product. And that stuff might help you for a bit, but it doesn't really last. And I think that's the essential problem with it, is that everyone can be top of TikTok for a day, and everyone's forgotten who that was by a week. And particularly in the modern world where everything's so like you can't. It's not a reasonable marketing strategy to try and do that, and it's not a reasonable kind of expectation of success. You can't have one viral hit and then expect that lasts for the brand for the next.
Yeah, it leads back into like what you were saying about brands reporting metrics that don't really mean anything at all.
And there's another problem there that some businesses will spend a lot on advertising. They'll do let's say they spend $1 million on advertising, and they'll see an uplift in traffic, and they'll go, oh, that's cool. We've seen a bit of an uplift in traffic from the advertising. That's good. Which is fine. And then they think, well, that's been working. But then what happens if they stop spending that and they turn it off? Is the traffic within a couple of weeks just tails off again? And the problem with that kind of level of spend is that it requires, Google love it, right? And as do Facebook, because it requires that level of consistent spend to even maintain some form of brand equity and awareness. But there's a problem if you're spending all this money on advertising, because then when you turn off the advertising, it's not sustainable, and it doesn't like have any lasting impact, and you turn it off and then it's gone. And that's great for Google and Facebook, because it means you have to keep spending money with them to get anything at all, to even access your audience. But that's not a sustainable way to build a business or a brand, because you just have to shoveling money on the coal fire just to kind of keep going. Well, there's much better ways to do that involve that, projects and creative that last the test of time, that really holds that brand value over an extended period. So again, like that virality, that focus on sort of impressions as the core thing you're going for, that throw a ton of like eyeballs in the top and hope for the best is often not very sustainable or effective.
Yeah, like when you think of like brands that like don't spend a lot of money on their creative that people watch a hell of a lot of, you think of like a really uber successful podcast, perhaps like the Joe Rogan podcast, or like similar. It spends almost no money on creative at all. It's just literally just content. It's just him talking to people and asking interesting questions and getting good answers. And I think I'm much more akin to sort of watching things like that. And I might like a Dior advert at the time, but I can't tell you any Dior advert I've ever watched in the past. I can sort of put my finger on it. So which one is more successful?
The other thing that's interesting to me is I've looked into this, and it strikes me that the whole industry is based on a couple of quite questionable studies about 70 years ago that nobody's really ever looked at. The idea that if you pass an ad 7 times, you'll remember it better. And this may have been true in the 60s and 50s when there wasn't many ads about and people were driving a lot in America and they see these billboards and they remember it. Well, that's fine. In the modern world where you're just like a million messages all the time, it's just nonsense. And yet people still are operating on this assumption that this sort of repetitive exposure is the essence of positive memory. And I don't think that's true at all. But I think people are so scared of the consequence of what that means if we all get past this collective delusion that no one's really questioning it properly. It's a nonsense. And it's interesting because we have all these social media platforms that are built on advertising, and often that has led to some pretty crappy incentives for them. It's led to bad incentives for media companies to monetize on ads. And I think that this is all driven by businesses wanting to pay money to improve sales, understandably, so wanting to spend money on marketing. This being pitched as a way of doing that. But ultimately, I think the whole process is probably past its sell-by date. And I think in the next 5-10 years, we're going to see that things shift a bit. But I've been thinking this for a long time and it hasn't seemed to happen. So I don't know. But it's all a bit of a Ponzi scheme. And you'll see with a lot of businesses who do no advertising at all and do very, very well. And it's because they get their product marketing right, they get their positioning right, and they fly from there.
Yeah, I think advertising in particular has like built itself up to be the pinnacle of like, sort of like art. You look at those particular high end, high concept, like a perfume ad. It's like sort of the absolute pinnacle of just randomness, trying to sell like a brand. Like since you're just getting the brand in front of people, right? And I think people sort of aspire to become that kind of like creative. But like as you say, I think not necessarily the best way to do it, and certainly not the most cost effective, perhaps.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so which analytics do you pay attention to the most, and what should brands be paying attention to when making content?
Which analytics?
Yes.
Do you mean like which metrics?
Yep. So yeah, like for example, views or engagement rate, or perhaps time watched on page.
Yeah, like time watched and engagement rate are very important, but it depends on the campaign. It depends on the particular type of video. So for brand stuff, yeah, time watched is the most important for like longer form brand stuff. Engagement for stuff that's more like service contents and more about like capturing demand. And yeah, traffic and click-through rate, stuff like that. I guess I'd cover all of them. But the one that I think that really matters long term is time watched.
Okay. Why is that?
Because it's the best indication of somebody like really caring. So the more people who are actually spending time with you, and I will carry this, not just time watched as the YouTube and Facebook, because that can be comprised of like, a million people watched our thing, but it's like, 2 seconds each that spreads out. No, I'm just talking about like the longer term, like engaged views. Let's get anything less than a minute down, and then overall, how much time people are spending.
Yeah, like I think one of my mates was showing me the analytics for his podcast, and they were like less than a minute or a minute and a half, and each podcast was like 2 hours long. This is on YouTube, and I was just like, I mean, is YouTube the best platform to host your podcast? I don't know, but like that seems like an incredibly low, time watched on page.
Of how many views?
I actually don't know. I think around 2,000 per podcast.
Yeah, which indicates that he's not targeting the right audience.
Okay, yeah. So how? Yeah, so
the people who are finding it are not interested,
right? So
for that perspective, it probably needs reframing. It probably needs maybe chopping up and turning into clips or segments rather than whole episodes. Or maybe YouTube's not really the right channel for it. Depends. Might not be. YouTube can be good for some podcasts, but not all.
How can you prove return on investment? I think maybe you talked about that in one of your previous presentations. Do you want to explore that a little bit, or?
Yeah, I mean, so I got two kind of views on this. One is ROI is a bad measure of video and creative generally because it's not money in, money out. It's not like return on investment is a specific metric that's used for certain kinds of things that it doesn't really apply to creative because you can't do that. You think about the way the value of the video works. Usually somebody's watched it, they liked it, they recommended it to somebody else. That like that brand value that you have of recommendation, basically what you end up doing if you try and measure return on investment is only measure things based on direct sales. Well, that's a very bad way to measure almost all videos, even like ones that are very sales focused. You're probably better off measuring like conversion assists over multiple visits, but that's becoming trickier with changes in analytics and the way that's being measured. So so broadly, I think it's not great to look at return on investment. I always think of like what you want to do is pick another metric that acts as an effective proxy for value, and time watched is a great one.
Mhm.
The number, conversion assists can be useful for certain kind of content on web pages. For like, you might look at view count for certain other videos. You might say, well, or like certain level of engaged views. Does that, let's say we're going to add a monetary value on that, and is that going to have value? And then you can kind of approximate it. But broadly, I think it's better to think about, well, what are we really trying to get from this piece of content? What's this supposed to do in the overall spectrum of our marketing funnel? And really only stuff at the very bottom of the funnel is there to drive direct sales. Everything else is there to sort of expand the rest of the funnel. And let's pick a really appropriate metric and go with that. So that's what I would tend to do. So if businesses come to me and say, we need ROI, I'm going, well, do you just mean that you need value? Or do you, because then I can work, then we can come up with something that really represents the value in a meaningful way. Or do you mean you literally need to be able to say, well, you spent this much money and got this much back? Because if you do that, you're heading down the route of, it's impossible to measure that. Like, there's no platform, there's no technology that allows that. The privacy doors have been closed, everything, cookie devices, like that will never be an effective reflection of reality. So what you end up doing if you try and measure that is to basically, you undervalue everything that's working and you overvalue everything that is measurable. And then you end up constricting all of your activities to one or two things and your business dies very quickly. I've seen this many times. So don't get obsessed with those metrics in a way. You need to think about a bit more sensibly about, okay, well, what are we trying to get from this particular investment? Does it do that?
Yeah, I think I completely understand what you're saying. It kind of like kills the fun. And you're like, well, like if the fun part, people watching the video because it was fun and sort of like entertaining, is that not enough? Because you're getting people to watch your brand, they're seeing the logo, and maybe they'll recommend the series to someone and they'll share it with people. Like maybe that's enough.
Yeah, well, it's more of like not every piece of marketing is direct sales, and the only way you can measure ROI truly is when it's direct sales, because everything else, the measurement protocols disappear, and you've no idea if somebody watched your thing, liked it, then went to a device a different time and made a direct purchase or clicked on a PPC. So you can't know that journey anymore. And that means that if you're trying to measure return on investment, you're undervaluing what the content's actually doing for you.
I think another brand I was working for, we produced like a successful podcast series for them, and I kept sort of saying like, listen, hey, why don't we monetize this? And they were like, oh no, we don't want to. No one's gonna want to sponsor a podcast. And I'm like, please trust me, people will sponsor your podcast. And like, since they've done it, like it's the £500,000 worth of revenue, and you're like, look, you can, it's out there. But I think people look at that sponsorship and they're like, okay, that's the return on investment. And you're like, no, the return on investment is not the sponsorship. It's getting, like the brand out there and like people to know about you and to like you, as you say, back to your brand affinity. So yeah.
And if you get $500,000 at the same time, lovely, great. But completely. I think that's it. So I think it's just about like just thinking strategically and sensibly about what you're trying to do with the content, and then setting up some sensible metrics that show whether or not that's happening.
Just in terms of creative direction that could help you out if you are working with a company, have you had types of creative directors that sort of like helped in this sort of process, or like what helps you most when you're starting a project with a company?
I mean, it depends kind of what project I'm working on, but yeah, great creative directors make a huge difference if you've got somebody who's really interesting to work with. It depends on the kind of project. If I'm working, like I work with quite a lot of music video directors for like creative, because they are particularly for like software videos, because they are very good at taking what is ostensibly a text and coming up with a interesting visual way of representing that's quite symbolic, and doing that within like 2-3 minute thing. So they're very good at that, translating text and language, and that's often what you need to do for sort of like those processes of turning like trying to come up with a creative execution for something that's quite dry. But great creative directors are excellent when they are able to throw a lot of ideas out there and riff on the strategy and be very, very fluid with their creative thinking and have lots of options. And I think that's really where it's helpful to be able to be very free at the start and open and have lots of options. And then when we commit to an idea, then be able to sort of, iterate it and tweak it down the line, but be able to sort of understand the strategy and then come up with something that really works for it. Bad creative directors are the ones that have an idea that they kind of want to do, and then sort of pre-rationalize the strategy to sort of try and fit into that idea, and are not necessarily quite good at thinking of lots of different ways forward.
Got it. What's the worst project you've ever worked on?
The worst project I've ever worked on.
I know you haven't had a bad project, Phil, but if you had to choose one.
Yeah, gosh, I don't know. I mean, well, I'm not going to name and share many clients, so I'm not going to do that. But I've worked with some businesses that were difficult, and had their own. The wanted a magic bullet, and weren't really willing to put in the work. I think that's where things go down.
Yeah, like not willing to put in the research behind it. They just wanted the magic bullet.
They want a video project to solve all of their business strategy problems, but are not willing to engage in the journey of solving those business strategy problems through the content. So they basically want you as a scapegoat because the business isn't working very well. Okay. And they think that if they can blame an agency or X, Y, Z, then that's easier than trying to shift anything.
Got it. Yeah. How do you foster creativity?
A lot of experimentation, a lot of play, I suppose, and a lot of fluidity, and being very clear on like the distinctions between processes. So like the process of coming up with ideas is very different to the process of editing them, and they are one should be very free and one should be very restrictive, and you never want to get into editing ideas while you're coming up with them. So I think there's that mode of just like, I'm just playing, I'm just seeing where it goes, I'm just coming with it, just not, and getting very good at that process is very helpful. Mm-hmm. And then being ruthless when it comes to editing and tweaking and saying no and yes as well.
Yeah. So iterating at the start and then being ruthless towards the end and saying yes, no.
Yeah.
That thing. Yeah. Got it. My question that I've wrote down is, what is the future of TikTok? But like, we don't have to talk about TikTok. Like personally, at the moment, I've been quite impressed with the content that TikTok's recommending me. It's a little bit creepy. I'll be talking about, like carpentry, for example, and then an hour later, I'll get a carpentry video pop up on my TikTok. But I actually find it, it's quite funny, and like some of the content is quite well made and thought out.
Yeah, I mean, there's some certainly good stuff on there. I'm quite negative on TikTok because I think it is very bad for us psychologically, and it's just like and I think that dopamine rush thing is just bad. Yeah. And not only that, the legal concerns around it, I can see it getting regulated or banned in countries in the next few years. So I think there's some open concerns about what TikTok is and where it's going to go, and I'm not entirely positive on it. So I don't play too much on TikTok myself. I don't use the app myself. I'll work with some businesses on it, but I do so quite reluctantly. Also because I don't think it actually, apart from a few edge cases, is that useful for businesses, because it's, again, like you live or die very quickly, and there's no long-term value really often. So I'm suspect on it, but I think that the future of that short-form creative stuff is interesting. I think that the way it's gone has been very creative, and it's been really interesting to see how people have done that. I think the next stage will be more interesting creative tools. So like tools that allow multiple camera angles, multiple like shooting, like automatic editing, AI sort of putting together various different aspects and ideas, more adjustments, more animation, more like automatic. Like think of the most complicated stuff you can do in After Effects. Give that a couple of years, you can just pull that together in a short video probably. So that kind of stuff will be interesting to see where that goes. So creatively it's interesting. From a business standpoint, I'm less bullish on it.
Yeah, got it. Just about talking about AI. So like I found like a site where you can plug in your podcast and it clips out social media clips for you with captions edited. And I was like, wow, that's going to save me hours. Like it's called Opus.pro.
Opus.pro, that sounds amazing. There's awesome. So many of these things down. I've really not really played with them all. Yeah. Oh, cool.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I was like, that's going to save me like 3 hours like of horrible editing. I hate making like social clips.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, exactly. All that stuff, like that kind of grunt work editing stuff is now basically solved, or will be within 6 months to a year, which is amazing. Kind of. I mean, it sucks people doing grunt work editing jobs, but yeah. Yep.
Be more creative. Do you use Substack at all, or have you ever like encountered it?
Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I like Substack. I like that approach. I'm a big. I'm a big fan of email. I think email is a good thing, and I think people owning their own audiences is a good thing. So I think the way that's going is a positive, and I think that's maybe the anti-TikTok in a sense, and I think that's a positive.
The anti-TikTok. Oh, yeah, nice. How are you using AI in your work already? Are you using AI?
Yeah, speeding up editing, storyboarding, really useful for storyboarding. So a lot of like come up with visuals and that kind of stuff. That's it at the moment.
What are you using the storyboard? How do you?
We just build up. So I'll use like Boardfish or whatever to build the board, but I'll use Midjourney and Stable Diffusion and things to build images that represent roughly what I want the shot to be.
That's cool.
So you can plan it out in advance, and then build an animatic off the back of that if you want as well.
Yeah.
So you can kind of like build a rough cut with no shooting, which is fun. And I think that for me that's a more useful. Like I don't want to use the AI stuff in actual videos usually, because I don't think that it is very authentic and it doesn't work. But it doesn't work creatively. But I think it's very useful to like use it for prototyping.
Last question is, if you could make one type of video forever, what would you make?
Well, I would do movies. I would do long form movies.
You'd be a movie director.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that'd be fun. I'd do do films.
Which director are you most closest to?
Gosh, I don't know. I've never really thought about that. I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know that I could possibly equate myself with any directors. I mean, I'm not really a director, right? I'm more of a producer, I suppose. So, I always hire in and work with directors. I can do a bit, but I'm not great. So I know my limits. So I don't know. Yeah, not sure.
That's cool.
Oh, there's lots of directors I admire, of course, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe get the listeners to write who they think you're closest to in comments or something. All right, cool. Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. Thanks for.
All right, my pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to the end of the show. If you've enjoyed the podcast, I would love if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, or check out the Small Pocket Podcast or my YouTube channel for more. I hope to see you in the comments. Thanks again for tuning in. See you next time.